everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we discuss the week's hottest legal topics. This time we are talking about presidential powers. We are going to discuss trades, tariffs, and pardons. A lot of hot things going on. So we're going to talk about the recent decision of U.S. V.O.S. versus U.S., which not many people know that name. So why are we talking about this case? Is because it's in the U.S. Court of International Trade. And it's a very big deal with regard to international trade, especially through Trump's recent tariffs. So we're going to discuss those hand in hand, the trades, the tariffs, and then some pardon powers. We've had the pardons that were issued immediately after Trump became president with the January 6th defendants. Now, recently, we've had some more, and most recently, the Chrisley family. That is hot in the news. This is a reality TV starred family. Almost everybody knows about them. A lot of people have thoughts and opinions one way or the other about these reality stars, but the parents were recently pardoned in this last week at the end of May, and we're going to be talking about Trump's pardon powers and the president's pardon powers in general. So stay tuned with us. Those are the three pieces, two of them partly together, but all talking about presidential powers and the exercise thereof. I'm Virginia Tarani. I am the attorney for Tarani Law, LLC, and the CEO of The Law Unscripted, which hosts this podcast. I am joined today by my colleague, my father, and Constitution and constitutional law expert, Dr. John Weil from the Middle Tennessee State University Honors College. It's good to have you again.
Good to be here.
Off we go, another father-daughter conversation.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I never thought I'd be having this type of conversation with my dad.
So I have to fill your readers in. I don't know if we've talked about this before, but tell me where we always took vacations.
Oh, to see rocks.
Well, more generally, we did that one year, yes.
National rocks, important rocks, and then we always went to presidents' homes.
Yeah, and historic spots like Williamsburg and Jamestown and whatever.
Lots of fun as a child.
You know, I've always joked that it wasn't until our daughters got married that we realized that most people go to the beach.
Or Disney World.
At last, right. So at last, I take the wife to France, and we get to go to a beach. And of course, it's Omaha Beach in Normandy.
It's Normandy.
There weren't people out there in bikinis. There were very nice memorials to people who had given their lives on D-Day and thereafter. But it seemed consistent with, I am now taking them to beaches, but they're historic beaches. So.
Absolutely. Got to keep consistent. And, of all of the beaches, that is probably one of the most important beaches anyone could ever go to.
And we were there on Memorial Day, which was, yes. we knew it was part of the trip. And somehow I hadn't connected before we got there that it was actually going to be on Memorial Day. So it was a very important trip to us.
Absolutely. We've been living vicariously through you and Mom for this last couple of weeks as you've been making that trip.
Anyway.
So no, good to mention.
If someone, you're always accused of never taking your kids to the beach, there's a beach you can take them to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, one of the most important ones. I'll be happy. Yeah. You know what? You can take me there.
Okay.
It's okay. I'll let you do that. I would sacrifice for that. But so with our normal wine, our weekly wine, we're still kind of in this pattern of drinking more caffeine than wine at the moment. But grab your own glass of wine and join us for some happy hour. Dr. Weil and I are doing caffeine.
Yeah, we're still back to Pepsi.
He's back to Pepsi. I'm sticking with Coke. I've got a Diet Coke. These are my favorite, and I'm not drinking it for weight. I'm drinking because I actually like the flavor, and the Coke itself is a little way too sweet for me. But I've got it in our coffee tumbler, which says, allegedly, this is coffee. Go and get your own at www.thelawunscripted.com, where you can also find some other fun merchandise that is legally related. And cheers, everyone, to another happy hour of hot legal topics. Okay, Dr. Violet, I have to start out with this. With this case, V.O.S. versus United States, I honestly, and I feel really stupid on this, I have to admit, I did not know, after 20 years of experience and working as an attorney, I didn't even know that there was a United States Court of International Trade.
And it has changed names a number of times. I think it may have once been called a customs court or whatever, but my understanding is it has almost exclusive jurisdiction over matters of trade.
Do they
And
get a lot of cases?
I honestly don't. I will have to add to what you're saying and saying, to my knowledge, I don't know that. Now they do cite a couple other decisions that they've made, but and they've been around for a while, but I don't remember a decision as important as this one. I mean, basically, it's sort of a wholesale assault on almost all the trade negotiations that Trump has done, which is, to announce unilateral trade increases, presumably for the purpose of negotiate. You set them high, knowing that they're going to be dropped lower, and it's hard to know for sure what his strategy is. But there have been some cases. I believe it's U.S. versus Curtis Wright from the 1930s, in which the court has upheld the right of a president, for example, to embargo goods, particularly weapons related, to a particular area of the world where Congress has given what's known as an intelligible principle. In other words, if they said, here are the tariffs, here's the trade policy, but in X, Y, and Z circumstances, we're going to give the president discretion for these reasons and under these processes to change it, the court has upheld it.
Okay.
But the president is relying basically on what we would call emergency powers legislation.
The current president.
Yes.
Donald
And
Trump.
this legislation has been out there for quite a while. And in fact, in the Nixon administration, Congress felt correctly, I believe, that this power was being abused, and so they put further limits on it. The president has, if for example a foreign country, let's say we have a 10% tariff, another country has a 10% tariff, and all of a sudden they raise it to 50%. Under this law, under current law, you could probably say, well, the president now has discretion to respond to this particular foreign action. But the current president is taking this to say, well, there's an overall trade balance. That's not good for America. That constitutes a trade emergency. So I'm going to start raising and lowering, according to my wisdom, tariffs. Now, the problem with that is, and we've discussed this before, the primary power that Congress exercises is the power of the purse.
Right.
And by the president's own arguments, tariffs are a revenue measure. And revenue measures are passed by Congress.
And revenue.
Fall under,
Go ahead. No, finish, please.
Fall under the authority of Congress. And Congress, there's a provision that says, well, there's a constitutional delegation doctrine, which the courts cannot turn over all of their authority to decide on constitutionality, throw up their hands and say, we're not having anything to do with this. No, Constitution gives them that power. They better exercise it. Same with, if the president tried to give away his pardon power, which I think we're going to discuss a little bit later,
yes,
the courts would undoubtedly say, no, that's your power. It's not Congress's power to decide. They can recommend, but you have to be the decision maker. And in this case, it looks like Congress has just pretty much faded back into the woodwork, and it's now going to be presidential policymaking. And you can say, well, and part of it comes with the president says he's changed positions. But early on, he says, well, there's a lot of fentanyl coming in from Mexico and Canada. I don't think
across our borders.
Canada. But because of that, we're gonna enact tariffs. Well, what do tariffs have to do if you were taxing fentanyl or
Right.
putting the tariff on fentanyl, that would be one thing, although it's very unlikely people are going to declare that that's what they're importing, so it probably wouldn't be very effective.
Right. But
But you can't just say there's a crisis, I'm going to do whatever I want.
right,
If you do, the Constitution is down the toilet, frankly.
and in this case, what do tariffs in China have to do with fentanyl coming across the Mexican border?
Well, you might, again, there could be specific cases where one might make a link. And in fact, now what you need to know about this decision, this that we're talking about now, the V.O.S. versus U.S. Almost, it's a three judges, two appointed by Democrats, one by Republicans. So it's not a partisan thing. All three of them ruled against Trump, but they have subsequently stayed the order until Trump can appeal. And I believe the appeal will go directly to the U.S. Supreme Court.
There's no higher appellate court for this one. This one court is
understanding. Now,
its
the
own.
court might do what it did in Apache Stronghold that we discussed in the last one, and they may just say, well, four of us don't want to hear it, so we leave the existing. But if the existing one is left in place, then that means the government either, if they are going to obey the law, either the president cannot exercise these powers, or what it sounds like the president is anticipating, and I'm not sure where he's going to find it, but he thinks he may have alternate authority somewhere else. So he might switch from, well, if it doesn't fit under this Trading with the Enemy Act, or it doesn't fit under national defense, maybe it fits somewhere else. But again, under current law, there are occasions where a president has a right to respond reciprocally to actions that are made by foreign nations,
but not proactively against other nations.
Well, there's certainly, the court is suggesting certainly that there is a limit. If it's done under an articulable, intelligible principle, then perhaps the power can be exercised. You can decide you can decide what arms to send into Ukraine depending on how the war is going. That would, or depending on, X, Y, and Z. That's much more bounded than saying you can decide anywhere in the world what tariffs you want to impose and not to impose.
Right. So let me bring some follow-up questions, and I want to go back to a couple of fundamentals, and I want to start with this appeal because we just hit it, and I don't want to move away from it too fast. So we've said, the court, where it has to go up on appeal is the Supreme Court. That's the only option. But the Supreme Court term is ending for this year. So does that mean the term is ending, there's no more case going up, or how does that work?
Well, it could mean that it would not be resolved for another year. There have been some extraordinary cases where the court has met over the summer, taken a special appeal because the issue, and I'm sure this is one that's considered very important in Trump's mind. So it's possible that they would do that. But again, the easiest out in some ways would be just to say, we're not going to take the case. The court has made its decision.
Deny cert.
Yeah. But I'm sure the president would squawk. And, any president in that circumstance would say, you're denying me powers that I need to, if you think of the president's power, he's commander in chief of the armed forces. He wages war. And to the extent that this is waging war, perhaps by less lethal means than bombs or guns, you can see where he would want to have some authority. But by the same token, the power to raise taxes and spend money is explicitly given to Congress. And a lot of this opinion, some of it rests on, what we call statutory interpretation. What limits has Congress imposed? But a lot of it rests on simple separation of powers issues.
Right.
What what role does the president have when it comes to raising money through tariffs? And the truth is, not that much, no power other than that which Congress has delegated with guidelines that are clear enough that it doesn't give him unlimited power. Something our Constitution doesn't have. And if I remember, the Constitution of France does. And when I studied French politics, it was always considered to be a possible flaw. Many constitutions will have this emergency clause.
Hmm.
I think we may actually have a variant of this with the power of habeas corpus. There may be a limit during times of war that you can suspend habeas corpus
Right.
in limited circumstances. But essentially, Trump is saying the situation is such an emergency that the rest of the Constitution is suspended. And the court is saying, hold on a minute, there's no overall emergency here. And to the extent that there is an nobody denies that, fentanyl is not, or I hope not too many intelligent people other than dealers would deny that fentanyl is not a good thing in the United States. But are the means selected to deal with this appropriate to the response?
Sure.
And the same thing is, part of the problem with President Trump's trade policies is it takes a graph and says, well, they're buying more from us, or we're selling more to them than they're buying for us. Well, if it's a country and we're getting primarily coconuts from them, they may not need things that we have, and vice versa. So that's not a very good measure of whether we're being taken advantage of.
Well, and under the Constitution, so Congress is dictated, the powers and limitations of Congress are dictated in Article 1.
Right.
Does it say anything in the Constitution in Article 1 about Congress and tariffs or trade?
Well, again, that's a good question. Does it actually use the term tariffs? And I have to admit, as a constitutional lawyer, as a law person, I should know that. So I can always go to the trusty, I hope,
Copy of your
index to my
Constitution.
book on the Constitution, which is coming out in an 8th edition next month. Well, let's relate it to it. I can tell you this. The powers over interstate and foreign commerce are given to whom?
Interstate and foreign commerce are still Congress, right? Since
Right.
it's commerce.
They're congressional powers. So they have that power, and then they have the power to raise taxes and spending. And so I do not know if there is. I think they may use the term customs instead of tariffs. Customs would have been the equivalent of that time.
Right.
But I'm not actually. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. So that's in there. That would be an export tax. I don't know if the term tariff itself is used. We got one more page here.
I think you're right with commerce, is discussing commerce is a type, it's trade. It's trade and the flow of money, the flow of income.
Yeah, I mean, I think
receipts.
that's the closest. Congress, and this is a power, by the way, that Congress did not exercise under the Articles of Confederation that preceded the Constitution. And one of the problems was that states were enacting tariffs on goods coming in from other states. And so Congress took, and it's one of the most powerful, that's almost as powerful, if not more so, than the congressional power to tax. So now again, the president has the power as commander in chief, which at times might involve foreign trade, particularly if you were, if the president said, we have reason to believe that uranium shipments are being diverted to countries and being used to, by Iran to build a bomb, I don't think the court or anybody would dare to intervene. They would
prohibit it.
Clear national security interests. But the kind of the kind of interests that are being invoked, while not inconsequential. I mean, we want to be treated fairly by foreign actors in terms of our trade, but we have sort of a ham-handed way, perhaps by the branch of government that really is not designed to be exercising these powers.
Right. So going back to the case itself, what law or specific power is the Trump administration claiming that it's using in order to create and make these tariffs against whichever countries that Trump wants to do it against?
Well, there's this National Emergency Act is one of them. But again, these acts in the past have included limits. You can't just you can't say we have an emergency with fentanyl, therefore I can go bomb another country, or
Right.
I can enact any tariff that I want.
I,
And so essentially, they're just saying the president has the power that has been delegated to him within limits by Congress, but there are limits. As declaring a state of emergency or declaring, a foreign country, we have something similar with immigration.
yes.
To say we're at war with Venezuela and therefore anybody from Venezuela can't come to the United States is a pretty big stretch, first of all, because we don't have a declared war.
Right.
And secondly, most of the people that are coming from there are not people who are coming to war against us. They're coming to escape persecution within their own countries.
Right. I think it's very similar to this use of the Emergency Act within the tariffs designation. I think is very similar to the use of the Alien Enemies Act with regard to immigration and deportations. And I think ultimately the Supreme Court's going to have to be deciding both as to what does it mean for an invasion, what is the interpretation of that word, and what is the interpretation of the word emergency when it comes to a national emergency? Is it overall war? Is this the term that is the interpretation, or is it something less than war? And if it's something less than war, what does that mean? I think those two are going to be at the forefront of what the Supreme Court is dealing with during its next term. And on an imminent basis, I think all of these things are a little bit more imminent. I think, like you said, Donald Trump definitely thinks that the tariffs and trade are an emergent situation. I think a lot of America would agree. Our grocery bills are rising. They're the eggs. I mean, I'm gonna be buying chickens probably to support our eggs at home. Who would have thought? But I think it's important to the American people just as much as to Donald Trump is who is in charge of the tariffs. And does Congress have the ability to stop them? Should they have to approve them? Because it is hurting. Maybe it would help in the end. I don't know. But right now it's currently hurting us. And is the only person who can decide whether it should be used the president? And is that supposed to be his power? I don't think so, based on our separation of powers.
Right.
All right, so there's the tariffs and trade. Let's run over to his pardon power. Like I said, the Chrisleys are front and center right now. Dr. Vile, do you even know who the Chrisleys are?
Yeah, I do. I mean, they're reality TV people. And let's widen it out a little bit. He's given a pardon to a sheriff in Culpeper County, Virginia,
Yes.
who apparently was selling badges, which enable people to get out of speeding tickets and the like.
Right.
And was convicted. Essentially, my understanding was like bribery or improper influence, and he's getting a pass. And there have been other cases where the president said, well, what do you think about the people who tried to kidnap a governor?
Right.
Well, as far as I can tell, they're pretty good people. I think they support me. Well, who cares? They don't, as it turns out, and I think he's since changed his mind. But a pardon, and let's go back to our friends here. And I certainly, and I don't know if we had a discussion of this or not. I was troubled by Biden's pardon of his son.
Yes, we did have a discussion, and we both are.
We are. It makes more sense to me now that Trump is president and seems to be using the Justice Department against enemies perceived and otherwise. But if that was wrong, then simply saying, to take the most obvious, there were blanket pardons, am I not right?
Correct.
To the people who attacked the U.S. Capitol,
Who
the people
participated.
who were responsible for injuring scores of police officers on that day, and arguably the closest we've ever come to a coup, and to give them a blanket pardon. Why? Because they support Trump. They
Yes.
support Trump's policies. Well, I don't want people free on the basis of whether the president likes them and this is true of Biden or Trump or Obama or anybody. Most administrations, and my primary critique, I discussed this in this book that I have coming out in an 8th edition companion in the U.S. Constitution. My primary concern in recent years has been that most pardons come in the last 60 days.
Right.
And they're often by outgoing presidents who do, Clinton pardoned his brother.
Right.
For drug deals. It's a brotherly thing to do, but a lot of other people have brothers who aren't presidents and don't get that option.
Right.
And Bush pardoned people that were being investigated by Congress or had been investigated by Congress, and he thought treated unfairly. But otherwise, most pardons, the executive office of the president set up a system where people can petition and explain why they think they were treated unfairly,
right,
or how they deserve the sentence, but they served for 10 years and they've done good behavior and they've reformed themselves and they want to get back to society. These are individual judgment calls, which I'm trying to remember. We have both seen the statue in front of Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama, with what is it? The scales of Lady Justice.
Yes, with the blindfold.
Blindfold. But there's an angel of mercy, if I remember, whispering in one of her ears. And I think there is an appropriate time for mercy. And I think there's also an appropriate time. Alexander Hamilton pointed out, I want to say Feb 78, but that doesn't sound right. I think that's the judiciary one. But Hamilton pointed out where there may be times of rebellion when a well-placed pardon would have people put down their arms rather than continue fighting against the government. So they were the two primary purposes of pardons. They weren't to enable the president, like a king, to say, off with your head and here's your promotion to this seat or this nobility or whatever. And I think we're witnessing, the greatest abuse of the pardon power that we have had. We had something similar before I came to Tennessee during the Blanton administration, if I remember. So the outgoing governor was selling pardons to, very serious offenders, and so much so that Democrats and Republicans agreed that they would inaugurate the new governor, Alexander, early to prevent the outgoing governor from continuing to pardon people who didn't deserve to be pardoned.
Right.
And this is not a partisan issue. It can be, but it need not be. It's if the president shows me someone who is reformed, if the president shows me an outrage of justice, a miscarriage of justice, then by all means, let's consider a pardon. But if we're going to start pardoning people on the basis of, if you pardon them on the basis of whether they like Trump, you could just as easily have done it on the basis of whether they like Biden or Harris or Clinton or any other figure. This is, it's a prerogative power. It comes from kingship. And traditionally, the primary check on the pardon power is election. But when you have a president in his second term and he can't run again, then there's very little electoral control other than, members of his party saying, if you continue to do this, we're going to look really bad and we're not going to be able to get reelected.
For me, it's hard because it says very plainly in the Constitution, he has the pardon power.
Right.
It's like a judge. If they wake up and eat the wrong side of the toast, then they go against somebody. You just never know. But in this particular instance, and I agree that it goes, whether it's Biden pardoning his son, et cetera, that there's a certain point, especially right now, where Trump's pardons seem to smell of extortion, seem to smell of tainting and corruption and the request for favors.
In one case, am I remembering the mother goes to $1 million a plate dinner?
Yes.
And the next week there's a pardon for her son?
Yes.
It's sort of like this is related to the whole issue of, the degree to which the president seems to be selling influence.
Correct.
Whether it's a plane that's going to go to his library, or whether it's a tower that one of his sons is going to build, or whether it's a Bitcoin that's in his name and that he's going to profit from. It is almost like a kingship.
Yes.
Where you do something for the king does something back for you.
Yes.
This is why those of us who really value the free enterprise system, this corrupts free enterprise.
Yes.
How many countries are there today where half the money that you spend abroad is to give bribes to people?
Right.
And this sets a standard that corrupts, free enterprise, people doing things, gaining through their own initiative rather than through special favors.
Absolutely. To me, the presidency is for sale. That's what it screams. The U.S. is for sale.
Right.
We're for sale, the highest bidder. If you're Elon Musk and give us billions of dollars, if you're the Chrisleys, to me, the Chrisleys are important. And this is why. Their sphere of influence and their wealth scream out of, okay, if you can get them on Trump's side, they have power over the people. They're these amazing socialites who the people love. They want to be forgiven. They're this, a middle-aged white couple.
Right. But they're not
on
contrite.
TV, and they're not contrite.
Right. They're not saying we're sorry. They're saying we were never guilty in the first place.
Right. And it's a ton of fraud, and it's a lot of monetary crimes. And to me, it's Trump going, well, it's just money.
Okay. And so put it on the other foot. When Clinton was in office, as Clinton's left office, they created this foundation.
Right.
And people contributed, I think in the end, like $150 million to creation of this foundation. And people were screaming, as I think they should have, these people aren't giving it because they believe in the goals of the foundation, which is going to glorify the Clintons. They're doing it to gain influence because they think Hillary Clinton is going to run for president someday.
Yes.
And once she was defeated for president, my understanding is they've gotten very few contributions since.
Exactly.
This is not an anti-Trump thing. This is an anti-corruption standard that should be applying whether it's a Republican or Democrat, a Clinton, a Trump, or Obama, whoever it is.
Agreed. And to me, the most telling piece of this, Dr. Weil, like you're saying, is, well, they support me. This, they're in favor of me, so I'm going to give it to them. And the Chrisleys, one of the Chrisleys' daughters, put out on social media this, thank you. I'm so glad my parents are getting out of prison. But the thing that struck me the most from her speech, from her thankfulness, was, I'm now going to support the Trump administration forever. I throw all of my support behind Trump. We're so grateful to him.
Former governor of Illinois says he is now a Trumpocrat. Why? Because he was given pardon for a long prison sentence that he fully deserved.
Right. We're buying favor. We're buying favor. We're looking at the mayor of New York City, right? His case has now been dismissed. It wasn't a pardon, but it was similar.
It was. Yes. Very
Yes.
concerning.
Goodness, buying pardons, buying power, buying influence, buying, it's just that's the reason we have campaign finance laws, right? To prevent people from buying into the presidency with their power.
Well, and of course, some people would argue that the decisions regarding campaign contributions have a similar problem, which, by giving basically unlimited ability for certain corporations to contribute to campaigns, that yes, it furthers free speech and that you can buy more campaign ads and whatever. Sure. But if they're all being, if they're being bought and sold rather than contested in the marketplace of ideas, it has a potential corrupting influence.
Okay, so that's about the pardon powers. Definitely stay tuned with us. Tell us what you think. Please don't be rude or use curse words. We don't like that. But we do support the freedom of speech, and let us know your opinions. Give us some basis for them. Interact. Like, subscribe, comment so that we can continue to interact with you guys. You can get our podcast for the next time, and it can reach a broader audience. In the meantime, don't forget to check out thelawunscripted.com. And next time, what we're going to be speaking about is Harvard. We're going to talk about Harvard and the educational institutions, the higher learning institutions, and what is happening there with the limitations, with the restrictions, with defunding, etc., and also foreign international students. So we're going to talk about that next. But today we've talked about V.O.S. versus U.S. with regard to trade and tariffs and the president's power, as well as his pardon power. Catch us next time and stay tuned with us for the Legal Weekly Wine.